Hello everyone and welcome to the Red Piranha SOC capability presentation on how to address your security monitoring and incident response requirements. My name is Damien Cantelo and I'm the head of product marketing here at Red Piranha. I'm also joined by James Bryan, our SecOps manager, who will take us through the details, and will also be doing a real world run through of a recent security breach with Qbot and Zerologon, which was just published a few days ago. So first off, why should you utilize a security operations center? A proper cybersecurity program is all about delivering tangible security outcomes. And these are the 7 key security outcomes you can see on the slide, which are consistent across most security frameworks that you'll be familiar with. Now, most organizations start by deploying security controls such as a firewall, AV software, etc., followed by a security assessment, and then begin looking at some of these security outcomes, starting with security policy management, so defining those documents that really set the policies and procedures for the organization. And the next step around staff awareness and education to make sure that all employees and board members are familiar with those policies and how they affect their day-to-day roles. Next is identity and access management, so the 3 A's being authentication, authorization, and accounting, as well as network segmentation. Then we move to vulnerability management, so not just vulnerability assessment, but also providing an ongoing program to manage and mitigate those vulnerabilities. Then we move through to security monitoring, which is obviously about identifying threats on the network, and incident response, which are the people and processes behind what actually happens when there is a data breach or an outcome. And that's what we're talking about today. So obviously those 2 hexagons in the bottom left corner is what we're focused on today. And following on from that is business continuity and disaster recovery, so how to get the business back on track afterwards. Now, interestingly, only half of mid-sized organizations, that's with more than 2,000 staff, actually progress far enough along this journey to implement security monitoring and incident response capabilities, and it's even less for small to medium businesses. This means that the majority of organizations out there have security controls in place, but no one really keeping an eye on things, which obviously represents a major risk. And it's no wonder that cybercrime is on the rise, with 3 out of 4 businesses having experienced a data breach in the past year, according to Forrester. Now, this is why we've developed CSOC, which is Crystallized Security Operations Center, which is a smart SOC that can be integrated directly into our Crystallize platform to deliver true MDR capabilities straight out of the box. Let's take a look at the top 5 security challenges facing businesses today. Insufficient personnel. Obviously, this is a key part around leveraging the village of security professionals through a security operations center or outsource arrangement. Insufficient budget. Again, there's financial efficiencies around outsourcing some of these services instead of developing that capability in-house. Not understanding how to protect against cyber attacks. Again, leveraging that village of experts, because not everyone can be across everything. Insufficient enabling security technologies. So again, not having that full stack of all the tools and technologies required to run a security operations center, and a lack of in-house expertise. So again, it's very hard with limited resources and limited budget to have everyone as experts internally with an organization, which again leads to that outsourcing arrangement. So interestingly, 3 of the top 5 challenges relate directly to insufficient expertise, which is what we're talking about today. Now, the latest cybersecurity workforce study in 2021 stated that there's now 135,000 cybersecurity workers in Australia, up 26,000 from last year, and we're projected to need a similar number again next year. But we're only training about 3,000 to 4,000 at uni each year, so there's a big skills gap. And it's the same trend around the world, even though I used Australian figures there. Now, it's hard for security professionals to stay across all aspects of cybersecurity with so many different specialist areas. And that's why companies need to leverage the village of security professionals by finding a trusted outsource partner. So what are the 3 key challenges? They were the broader cybersecurity challenges. Now, what are specifically the key challenges around security monitoring and incident response? So first off, information overload. 69% of enterprises receive more than 100,000 alerts every single day, which is just too many to handle. And interestingly, only 40% of those organizations are able to address either most or all of the alerts they receive. So more than half of them are going unnoticed. Second, we have integration overhead, I should say, which is just getting too complicated. So building a SOC of your own requires dozens of disparate systems, which James will show us a slide on this later on, to be put together, taking over a year quite often and costing $1 million or more to do properly. You really need a unified platform with data standardization. This is something Gartner are now calling the mesh security platform, integrating a data lake, which drives SOC technical capability around automation and efficiencies in capability and delivery of those SOC services. This means less operational costs for more security outcomes that we saw on the previous slide. Now, Crystaleye offers an integrated deployment model, which means no pain with integrating disparate systems, which in turn greatly reduces engineering costs relating to SOC deployment, but also reduces ongoing tech debt and operational costs over time. We've been able to simplify the billing model in the Crystaleye platform and CSOC to reduce the costs associated with accessing a SOC, which further leads to customers only paying to what they use going forward, which drives operational efficiency and on demand with no outlay. So the final challenge is around resource shortage. It's just too specialized. There are dozens of specialized roles in cybersecurity, and it's impossible for staff to be specialists in everything. You need access to that village that we mentioned, which gives more capability with less spend. We implement human-machine teaming in the Crystaleye platform, which allows efficiencies in access to those capabilities on demand when you need them most. It's all about security maturity. No matter where an organization is at in this journey, there are always ways that they can improve. Now, we don't need to look at all of the detail across each of the squares in this table, but really we're sort of looking at the security aspects down the left column. So everything from patch management and antivirus all the way through to risk management and governance, moving from basic to advanced. And really the idea here is with this methodology is taking customers from the first column around initial capability all the way up to an optimized capability. And if we look at the second last row is what we're talking about today around security monitoring and incident response. This is really what the focus is around SOC capabilities. So it's really a pragmatic method of evaluating the current state of your cybersecurity posture as measured across the various security aspects that your business needs to address. Here's a quick word cloud on why to use a SOC. Regulatory compliance is a big one. Customers demand, they often need that capability for them to be working on large contracts. Vulnerability management is key. Reducing costs by outsourcing a complicated area. Threat awareness is critical with automated actionable intelligence. Centralized visibility, improved collaboration. Log management, which is a headache to do yourself. Asset awareness is always changing. Value for money, again, talking about driving cost savings to the business. Proactive detection, because people can stay on top of the alerts, and continuous monitoring. So there's many reasons to look at it. So why outsource instead of insourcing? Well, staffing. Obviously, you get access to those cybersecurity skills immediately, as we talked about the village. Set up an integration cost. It's really easy to implement, and it's much more scalable than building it in-house. Uninterrupted service gives you guaranteed uptime, and staying ahead of the threat intelligence landscape evolving is just to stay one step ahead of those threats, as we mentioned. Here's the incident response challenge. The average time to identify and contain a data breach is around 287 days, according to the latest cost of a data breach report by the Ponemon Institute. Now, for one of our clients in the biomedical space, ATT&CK, an incident was actually detected and resolved in just 24 minutes, which was a record for us. And just lightning quick when you think about it, taking up to a year on average for the industry to do it, to really leverage the Crystaleye platform and CSOC capability and leveraging the village, as we mentioned. We're really able to get on top of those things very quickly. And that was really achieved by utilizing the DFIR service, so Digital Forensics and Incident Response Service, which is built into every Crystaleye platform. So with the DFIR toolset and the integrated playbooks built in alongside the managed detection and response, you can roll out a cybersecurity maturity level most organizations would only dream of right out of the box. Next, compliance. Compliance is a massive driver around security monitoring and incident response, and pretty much every security standard and framework out there does have some very clear requirements around both of these areas. If we look at ISO 27001, Section A12.4 covers logging and monitoring, and Section A16.1 covers incident management. With CREST, There's two different sections in there. There's the Cybersecurity Monitoring and Logging Guide and the Cybersecurity Incident Response Guide that both outline that in great detail. Further with NIST, SP 800 Section 137 covers Information Security Continuous Monitoring, and SP 800 Section 61 covers the Computer Security Incident Handling Guide. And then finally, the PCI Requirement 10, which is about the payment cards industry, requires all members to track and monitor all access to network resources and cardhold data. Now, the reality is for most organizations with limited budgets and resources, it's almost impossible to meet these standards without some kind of SOC and or hybrid model with an outsourced partner to deliver those capabilities. And with that, I would now like to hand over to James to take us through the next phase of the presentation. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Damien. What we're going to talk about now is what makes up a SOC. So what makes up a SOC? We have three pillars here. We have process, people, and technology. We're going to discuss each of these in detail. We'll start first with a discussion on traditional SOC layout and what that looks like. What we're looking at here is essentially a component of a SOC. This would be what we would see as part of the vulnerability management solution, part of the cyber threat intelligence platform, part of the incident response platform, and part of the SIEM. I say part because this is technological stack, and it thus requires the actual staffing and experience to be able to utilize these things. So if you did want to go ahead and deploy your own SOC in 2022, this is probably what you would be looking at from an open source stack solution rather than a corporate style paid solution. So we'd have IDPSs and agents sitting in the network that is to be monitored. We'd have things like log transport and file transport, sending these through a tunnel into a cloud-based solution that's receiving these, it's aggregating them, it's performing directives, it's enriching them with various things, then it's pushing them onto a cyber threat intelligence platform, creating actionable alarms and presenting these in a dashboard. And this is essentially what Red Piranha is doing for a SOC, not the same stack, it's just an example. But we're taking all of the difficulty out of this. Essentially, you're deploying a Crystal Eye on the site on the left-hand side, and this is being integrated, ingested into our SOC, where we then have the staffing capability to be able to monitor and respond to threats in a 24/7 time period. As far as the people are concerned, Red Piranha SOC is made up of 3 levels. So we have level 1. These are the frontline staff. They're the ones that are receiving the events and alarms and triaging and collecting data for level 2. Level 2 is then reviewing further into the log data. They're dealing with the directives and rule creation processes. They're evaluating attacks and potential breaches. They're determining the scope of the threat and suggesting remediation potentially. If there is the likelihood that a threat or an event is a real world one, then this would then be escalated to level 3. Now at level 3, we have the staff with the most experience and time in this industry that are able to really provide a second level of triage to that level 2. They dig deep into the threat data and they're proactively studying logs and other data to make decisions on an incident response scenario. So at level 3, does this event become an incident? If it does, there's that escalation. And the level 3 analysts and incident response handlers will then be the ones dealing with this. So alongside all of this staffing, we then have certifications and the need for a constant increase in knowledge and potential. So I've put some example certifications down here, things like CREST and Certified Incident Handler and so forth. These are all very expensive courses. They take a great deal of time and they require a certain amount of prior experience. So in order to bring staff in with these levels of experience to handle the 24/7 period, on top of the struggle of deploying a SOC, even with the open source stack I've mentioned before, this is going to cost a great deal of money and be, again, with the skill shortage, this is going to be a very difficult thing to accomplish. Now, as far as process is concerned, along with all of that, you need to drive the people to do the right thing at the right time consistently. Red Piranha employs a number of different means to do this. First of this is playbooks. So this is how we look at individual campaigns and attack scenarios, and we know next steps that attackers will take. We know what to look for. We know how to remediate and mitigate attacks as they take place. This is for responding to known and unknown threats. And it also includes the client communication perspective. With your own SOC, again, there's going to be key stakeholders, so there's always going to be that level of communication. The escalation and triage process. So at what point does an event or an alarm move from level 1 to level 2? Internally, we have a segmentation of visibility. So level 1 and level 2 staff are actually not able to see, which customer this belongs to, which network it may have gone to, potentially from, depending on the direction of traffic flow. But this cuts down on the ability for sensitive information to be visible to lower level staff until it reaches a level 3, in which case they can see, who is the customer, what is the network, and they can then proceed with that client communication to reach out to the dedicated incident handler or CISO or security officer on the client side to instigate that incident response process, which brings me to my next point. That is the incident response processes. And these will vary depending on the classification. Is it internal? Is it external? What are the assets that are affected? And so forth. Along with that, we have the documentation, things like the SIT rep reports and the after incident action reports and so forth. On top of that, we have the SOC management metrics, KPIs, events per second, and really the metrics that are related to the customer that show value. That is the mean time to detection and the mean time to response, which are really the key players in determining the effectiveness of a SOC. So how long did it take you to realize that there was an event related to an attack? And once you've realized that, how long did it take you to respond to that threat? There is also mean time to recovery, as well as mean time to response, which is also MTTR. But this is a lot harder to measure because it requires feedback from the end customer to say that, yes, we have recovered from this security incident. Now, what makes a CE SOC, which is Crystallized Security Operations Center, what we use internally? As I mentioned before, it's more than just SIEM, it's more than just log aggregation and correlation. The SIEM is a major component of that, which is why it's listed first. But on top of that, we have things like the orchestration and automation platforms, or SOAR. We have vulnerability management systems. We have packet capture management used for incident response management for knowing the informational assets and the IT assets that are involved in these events and alarms. We have incident and ticket management, which is very important for maintaining that process, for really drilling down into the steps that have taken place, who handled it, where it was passed on to, and so forth. Collaboration tools, which allow SOC analysts at multiple levels to work together in incidents and in the analysis situations. We have endpoint detection and response, or the EDR component of this, which allows events and actions on endpoints to be fed into this system alongside the network detection and response. We have malware and analysis and sandbox tools, which are used by our threat hunting team to break down malware samples and work out signatures and detections and remediation and mitigation strategies. And we have the cyber threat intelligence platform. Alongside that, there's obviously cyber threat intelligence feeds that drive into this, that provide value. Just having a platform is worthless without the actual data. Now, moving on to capabilities. Red Piranha's SOC capabilities, as it were, is that we have 24/7, 365 threat monitoring and response. We have the people, the expertise, the processes, and the technologies that I've already mentioned that allow us to deliver this. We have threat mitigation, response, and activities tied into the playbooks, and we're able to deliver this across all areas from on-prem, cloud, remote workers, OT environments, ICS, industrial control systems, and so forth. And really our aim then is to reduce the time between detection and response, that is reducing the dwell time of an attacker in a network, and additional functions such as digital forensics, incident response, log management, threat hunting, and so forth. Now, when I say reduced dwell time, the example I'm going to give later on is actually taking place over an hour and a half. So traditional dwell times might be weeks or months. Really a SOC with a highly powerful SOAR, and in today's environment, what we're looking at is the ability to respond to threats very quickly, get those initial detections, feed them into playbooks, work out potentially what campaign, what threat actor, what's the next move, actually respond to that within the window of opportunity. That is the difference between coming out of this as a functioning company or not. Now, this real-world SOC example scenario took place in November 2021, so it's fairly recent. This is actually making use of an article that's published in the DFIR report 2 days ago. I'm doing this because I can't give an example from Red Piranha. In doing so, obviously, would be a breach of our relations with our customers, primarily. And secondarily, this is an end-to-end situation. So we know the initial point of entry, and we know there's complete compromise. Generally, when we see this sort of situation, it is someone who's come to us with an incident response after the case, not a SOC customer, in which case we're able to detect these things and they never really eventuate into a full-blown attack. So we've broken this down into individual phases against the Mitre model. So we have initial access, so we have a DLL execution, and I've made a note here to point out all of the areas and functionalities that we could use to actually block these and detect these, tied into the Crystal Eye product and the CSOC environment. So this is what people would commonly focus on with a SOC situation. They generally focus on beginning and end, so that is, it's deployed through phishing, which is a very common scenario, and the endpoint is some software runs that encrypts all of the data on the servers and workstations and so forth. There's a whole lot of steps in between that an attacker needs to accomplish in order to actually successfully ransomware an entire business. And these really give us an opportunity to detect in the initial phases and mitigate an attack before it gets to that point. So for initial access, we have malicious DLL execution, in this case, most likely delivered by email, phishing attack. This could be blocked by EDR software. It could also be blocked by secure mail gateway implementation through signatures and through malware detection. Now, assuming that this is able to bypass that through the existence of a modified malware or a new strain, this would then be executed on the endpoint or attempted to be executed. Again, this could be blocked by EDR. The actual execution of a PowerShell script in a scheduled task, this can be detected through a Windows event log. So ingesting Windows event logs into a SOC would then provide the capability to be able to detect that event. And obviously there is a significant cost in doing so, because Windows event logs, as you may be aware, are extremely heavy. This means more events, which means more things to triage. It creates an additional amount of noise, leading to those situations where, as Damien mentioned, you've got 100,000 log entries a day or events in the SOC, and this creates alert fatigue. So these sorts of things are likely to be missed, particularly if you're using the sort of things like scheduled tasks to do backups. The Windows event log for a scheduled task is not very specific in that sense. So this is an indicator, an early indicator, more than it is a very intrinsic detection. So the DLL executes, decodes a command and control location for Qbot or Qbot. If it doesn't exist, it goes and gets a binary from the web. So potentially it's already been deleted by the EDR software. It'll go and get another version of that. That reach out to the internet to download the payload or the stager, the secondary payload, can be blocked by the intrusion detection prevention system. It could also be blocked by proper implementation of a web proxy with an anti-malware engine. Now for persistence, they've used that scheduled task, the same as above, again, detected by Windows event logs, and privilege escalation in this particular attack was using a Zerologon vulnerability from 2020. This was very common at that point in time, but it's still used by a number of malware authors and ransomware gangs to allow them to gain access to domain administrator accounts on AD systems and so forth. Now, we have a number of detections in place to, or signatures to detect this particular attack, which I'll go through later. These can be used to actually block that. So blocked by IDPS, and again, detected by Windows event logs. But again, this creates a lot of noise. What we're looking at here is login events in Windows. Essentially, you're going to get a lot of those in a Windows environment as part of normal daily operations. So generally, when people are detecting this sort of attack in Windows event logs, it's after the fact. It's more a forensic exercise than it is a defensive one. As far as defense evasion goes, that is the malware looking to bypass any sort of antivirus, anti-malware systems. It's injecting itself into the explorer.exe process using syswow32, and this allows it to bypass EDR. But essentially, it's not bypassing anything at the network layer. It's only bypassing application, so it's not going to get past IDPS in doing so. As far as discovery goes, that is the malware reaching out to the network to determine what assets exist and what infrastructure is there. It utilizes living off the land commands. There's a number of these in the link and the notes if you're interested, to discover hosts, shares, and so on. This is using things like AD find and other built-in tools. Even the net command, and these can be detected by Windows event logs, both the discovery process and the execution of those commands. As far as lateral movement goes, so once it's discovered all of those hosts, it then needs to spread throughout the network. It's again using living off the land technologies. It's using the SIEM or Service Control Manager, and it's deploying Qbot Strike beacons on the computers that were enumerated. Again, this can be detected by Windows event logs. It's using RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, that have been then enabled on those endpoints through SIEM. And this can again be detected by Windows event logs. This could also be detected at a network level. I should put that in there as well, through RDPS and through network anomaly detection, which I've mentioned in the next one. That is the, sorry, yes, I'm confusing things. The actual RDP login rather than the enabling would be detected by IDPS and anomaly detection, as well as the event logs. Now, command and control. Obviously, you've now got this malware spread throughout a network. It needs to then reach out and ask for commands, or wait for commands in this sense. So it's reaching out to 2 domains with obviously associated IP addresses. And this is really where CTI comes in. So things like known bad domains for C2 servers, IP addresses, and so forth. These can be blocked by a number of different techniques. Primarily is the DNS ensure, blocking the known bad domain. IDPS, if there is a signature for that particular domain or IP address or range. And I've put in here also application whitelisting at a network level. So this is a HTTPS encrypted process. That is, if you have deployed a network level application whitelisting control on the network, you will know the applications that should be running on endpoints. And this C2 will present itself as a new certificate exchange, therefore a new process or a new application, and thus this would be blocked through that process. Now, exfiltration, obviously once you've then managed to gain access to all systems within the network, a ransomware gang, they sort of have a 2-pronged or 3-pronged approach these days. That is ransomware everything, encrypt everything, but also get all of that data so they can hold you to a secondary ransom. So generally we'll see this exfiltration take place before the encryption. In this instance, it was performed by a Qbot Strike C2 channel, again, HTTPS, so this can be blocked by application whitelisting. The detection in this situation was actually through something called canary documents, where they've put in some code execution into some Office documents that reaches out to a web endpoint and creates an alert. Again, something that can be brought into a SOC or implemented as needed. But this could also be detected through traffic anomaly detection. So if you see this happening at 2 a.m. and there's a massive spike in traffic coming from all endpoints out to an IP address in Russia, this should obviously pose So it should be fairly obvious that something bad is going on. Unfortunately, at this point, the ransomware gangs already have a foothold on the network. If you do break this network stream, they're likely to just encrypt anyway. So really, we need to detect and block the attack before we get to this point. Now, I'll put in detections here. So for the Red Piranha device and our IDPS engine, these particular rules can be used to detect and block the attacks that take place in this particular example. So we have PowerShell activity over the SMB protocol, command shell execution over SMB again, SCM or Service Control Manager. We have some known C2 or CNC server groups as well there. So reach out to those CT servers would have been blocked. And then the privilege escalation attacks in Zerologon, that exploitation, that can be detected a number of different ways. So there's 4 different rules there as well. Some of these are a lot noisier, the last 2. So they'll be disabled by default. They can be enabled through a security tuning activity. But the first 2 would then block the Zerologon attack taking place. Now, what we're going to dig through here is actually the timeline of those events, which I've covered already. There's some more detail here on specifically, the processes that were run, etc. But we're going to tie in where a SOC could have blocked and detected each of those attacks. So initially, we have that phishing attack, which is not really listed on this chart, but this is whatever took place in order to get this DLL into the system. Assuming it was a phish, it could have been a thumb drive or some other kind of waterhole attack. But this would generally be blocked by EDR, Mail Gateway Scanner as mentioned. The execution of that malware, again, blocked by EDR, detected by Windows event logs. The C2 activity, so this would be blocked by those Fiodo tracker rules I mentioned before, IDPS and web proxy anti-malware. So there's a list there of commands that net local group, net share, net view. These are commands that exist on all Windows systems after NT4, I believe, that will show you what there is within the network. So really this is that discovery process. Then we have that scheduled task creation for PowerShell script execution. So another point here is the crystallite attack surface reduction. You can actually enforce on an endpoint the ability to allow or disallow the execution of PowerShell scripts if they're not needed, or if a certain user shouldn't execute them. This should really be a major consideration, as they're used in a lot of different ransomware and malware campaigns. So this can be detected by those Windows event logs and also endpoint agents. C2 begins, so this reaching out to those C2 servers, again, blocked by IDPS and AWL. Then we have that Qbot strike discovery process. So it's using, again, some net commands to work out where the controller is, domain controller is, again, detected by event logs, and the Zerologon exploit, which is blocked by those IDPS rules. Then we have that beacon reaching out to the outside world, again, detected by Windows event logs, and this bypasses most EDR through to it being deployed or injected into the Explorer.exe process. We see the AD find tool being used, again, detected by Windows event logs, and then an overpass the hash is performed. So this is a kind of security downgrade or cipher downgrade attack. Generally something we see with tools such as Mimikatz that are gathering hashes, and then it'll, from my understanding, it will drop back to an RC4 encryption cipher, pass the hash on, similar to a pass the hash attack, and then return with a usable hash that can then be passed on to the domain controller. Again, detected by Windows event logs. There's a number of different IDs that you can use to detect this. Qbot Strike Beacon is then installed as a service on the domain controller. Again, Windows event logs, something that should be noticed, a new service being installed on a high value server. Security software discovery, which is pretty interesting. So we're looking out, or the malware is looking out for any EDR software or tools that may exist on the endpoint. Again, pointing to the fact that network detection and response is a very valuable tool. And you can't rely only on endpoints. And this can be detected by Windows event logs, so long as you have the rules in place to detect things like named pipes and so forth, which we're seeing here. Then we have the Qbot beacon service installation, again, Windows event logs, and an RDP connection, which could be blocked and detected by RDPS and anomaly detection. And finally, UTC alerts triggered from Canary document. So this is really where the particular business found out that they were at this point where everything had been ransomed, and this is really when this document is being copied across over the internet. Now, I'm not sure how this situation ended, since this is the last event in the chain. Potentially, there was a detection in this SOC, and they managed to block this attack at this point. But the reality is that an hour and a half has passed since the initial or the first event, to the point where documents are being exfiltrated to an external IP address in Russia. So there's a number of different places that a properly implemented, maintained, and monitored SOC would be able to detect this sort of attack taking place and perform mitigation remediation actions. And really, when you have that outsourced SOC capability, like you would have with Red Piranha, you have the agreements, the contracts, everything in place. You have the staff waiting there to act to this sort of thing. And you should be able to block this attack very early on in the chain, especially before information is exfiltrated to the attacker party. Now, this is a sort of technical diagram here. What we're looking at is a Mitre attack mapping of this entire attack end to end, all of the TTP IDs that are related to this. And this is the sort of thing that Red Piranha will take and turn into a playbook, which forms our process for dealing with this sort of attack with a known campaign. Because usually when you'll see an attack like this taking place, you'll see the same attack taking place for a significant amount of time. In the case of Qbot, this has been going on quite a while, and while Australia only makes up, I believe it's 4% of the total attacks from this banking Trojan. The malware may change over time, but the actual implementation and the campaign and the way the attacker does things, these are very unique signatures to an attacker. Similarly, the malware might change, but the exploit used for privilege escalation might change. So we'll really monitor these over time, making use of threat intelligence, things like the DFI report, and things that we've seen within our customers and other customers' networks, and even information through the Cyber Threat Alliance, to determine how to process, mitigate, detect, and remediate threats of any nature.